Hey, what's up guys? How's it going? Welcome to the JSON Crash Course. In today's video, you're going to learn everything you need to know about JSON. I've already written a blog post about it on my website, qscoding.space. You can use this for your future reference, and also I'm gonna use this throughout this video, so check that out. I'll put the link on the description. So first of all, what is JSON? JSON stands for JavaScript Object Notation. It is just a subset of JavaScript, and it is a lightweight data interchange format. So what does this mean? First of all, it is a data format. Suppose you have 10 users' data. You cannot store them randomly. You need a format to store those data. And JSON is that kind of data format. It solves the problem how you store the data. It doesn't solve the problem where you store the data. Okay, and also it is a data interchange format. Now what does this mean? Basically, you can use JSON format to send data from one place to another, back and forth. And most of the time JSON is used for sending and receiving data between a server and a client. For example, there is two entities, a server and a client. So a client sends a request to the server to get some data. The server gathers those data and put them in a JSON format. Then server sends those data to the client. And also the reverse can happen. The client needs to send some data and the server will store the data. So you can use JSON format to send those data. There are other formats out there, but JSON is the most popular. And it is also used for configuration files. For instance, if you have experience installing packages with npm or yarn, you will see that there is a package.json file where all of the data about the project is stored, the packages that are installed, their version, and everything. And also if you use VS Code, there is a file called settings.json where all of the configuration are stored. And JSON is getting more popular for configuration files. Now, why use JSON? Well, first of all, it is very easy to read, write, and understand. Now, I'm not talking about machine, I'm talking about developers. You will see how easy it is to write, read, and understand. And if you know JavaScript, you already know JSON because it's a subset of JavaScript. And JSON can be used with any programming language. Just because it says JavaScript object notation, that doesn't mean that you cannot use it with other programming languages. I believe all of the programming languages have some sort of way to parse JSON data. And it is pretty lightweight. It is important because if the client needs to send some data to the server or the server needs to send some data to the client and the data is big, then it will take more time. But if the data is lightweight, then it will take less time. So it will make the user experience good. So that's why it is really important. So let's see what are the data types available. JSON supports almost all of the data types that JavaScript supports except few. So we have string. You know what a string is, any text, but it has to be enclosed by double quotes. You cannot use single quotes. Then we have number. You can use any valid number. You can use positive, negative, floating point numbers. Even you can use scientific numbers too. Then you can use Boolean, true or false. Then we have object. An object is just a collection of key value pairs and they are enclosed by curly brace. And an example would be like this. This is a key and this is the value. Now a key in JavaScript is a string, so you have to enclose the keys by double quotes. And the value can be anything, any valid JSON data types. It doesn't have to be a string. Then we have an array. An array is just an ordered list of data enclosed by square brackets, not curly braces, like this array of numbers or an array of string. And finally, we have null. And let's see the unsupported data types. You cannot use function in a JSON. You also cannot use date in JSON. If you really want to store dates, you have to store them as a string. Then you have to parse the date manually. And finally, you cannot store undefined. Let's see the JSON syntax. So like I've told you, a string has to be enclosed in double quotes and all the property names are strings, so they have to be enclosed in double quotes. So here is one of the examples. So here we have the key and the key is enclosed by double quotes, and also make sure you have a comma at the end. So that's why it is valid and it is invalid. And JSON data has to have a top level data. Now what is a top level data? Now if you use an object, an array, you can nest datas. That makes sense, right? So as you nest data, you will go one level deep. So you need to have a top level data like the string or maybe this number. This is a top level data, even though you cannot nest a string inside a string, but these are still top level data. But if you put two strings next to each other, then it won't be one single top level data, it will be two top level data, and that is not allowed. You can only have a single top level data. An invalid JSON example would be like this. So we have two objects, both of the objects are top level data and they are next to each other, they are not nested, so that's why it is totally invalid JSON. And like I've told you, you will use an array or object as the top level data like below. You will never use a JSON file for a single string or a number. So here we have an object, a user object actually. We can use string, numbers, booleans, and also we have nested an array. Or you can have an array that has objects nested, but you cannot have an array then another array. Then it will be invalid because there will be two top level data. Okay, so now that we have known that what are the data types JSON supports, what it is, and what is the syntax, let's make our hands dirty and write some real JSON code. Alright guys, so here I'm on my text editor. I have created a file called data.json. .json is the file extension for JSON file types. So let's write some real JSON. Like I've told you, you have to have a top level data. You can use a number like 1, 2, 3, 4. You can see it is not giving me any error. It is still valid JSON. And you will not do anything like this. You will use something like an array or an object. So let's create a user object. Let's give it a name. And name will be Onjon. Now you can see it is giving me error. Property keys must be in double quotes. Let's surround this with double quotes. And also let's change it to double quotes. Okay, so now it is not giving me any error. It is now a valid JSON. So let's add some property. Make sure you have a comma. Then let's give it an age like 21. Yes, actually my age is 21. Let's add cars. And you can see I have added an array of strings. And this is how you nest data. Now inside an array you can mix up data. It doesn't have to be an array of string or an array of number or an array of objects. You can mix up data types. For example, I can add a object here, and I can add a property year, maybe 2018. And Prettier has just formatted the code for me, and it is still a valid JSON. You can see there is not any error. And if I want, I can create an array of objects. And I'm gonna cut it from here. And I'll paste it again. Okay, so it is still a valid JSON. But how can you be so sure that it is valid JSON? Well, there are a lot of tools out there on the internet. You can use them to check if a JSON data is valid or not. And one of those websites is jsonlint.com. I will put the link on the description. So I'm gonna copy this and I'll paste it here. And let's click on validate JSON. And you can see it is telling us valid JSON. So let's mess up with this. Let's put single quotes. And let's click again. And you can see it is giving us an error. And this is a pretty handy tool, so you can check that out. Now let's see how we can use JSON in real life. So I have an index.js file, and also console is present on the right side. Now, like I've told you, any valid JSON data is valid in JavaScript. So I'm just gonna create a variable const data, and I'm just gonna paste some JSON data here. This is an array of users object, and if I just do a console log data, and you can see we have an array of objects. Now when you will send JSON data to a server or anywhere, you have to send the JSON data as a string. You cannot send this JSON data like an array of objects, and you can do that very easily. So let's create a variable const JSON string, and we have to use the JSON object and it has a method called Stringify. It takes a value which will be the data, and if I console log JSON string, and you can see this is now a string, a valid JSON string. You can see this string is not that readable, but we can pre-print that. So Stringify method takes multiple parameters. On the second parameter, it takes a function. We don't have to pass that, we can pass null. And on the third argument, you can pass a number which will be used as a space. I'm gonna pass 4. So now let's run the file. And now you can see our data, even though it's a string, it is pretty printed. So that's how you pretty print a JSON string. Now the server will also send a JSON string. How can we convert it back to a JSON data? Well, we can do that very easily. So I'm going to create another variable, JSON data. And again, we have to use JSON object. It has a parse method, and we're going to pass the JSON string. Now we'll console log JSON data. And you can see we have an array again. We have the same array of objects. Alright guys, so that's it for today's video. That's what you really need to know about JSON. If the video has been helpful for you, and if you have learned something new from this video, please like, share, and subscribe to my channel. In the next video, I'm going to talk about Fetch API. Fetch API is a browser method that you can use to send requests to any kind of third-party API server. So if you are interested, subscribe to my channel and press the bell icon so that you don't miss the video. And also, if you want to get daily tips and tricks about full stack web development, you can follow me on LinkedIn, Twitter, or Instagram as thatonjohn. And I will see you in the next video. Goodbye.